Hello everyone, welcome to the first ever episode of the full Pelt Music Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Barnes. We are going to be joined today by Frank Turner. Before we get started, just a reminder to follow us on our social channels at Full Pelt Music to stay up to date with the latest from Full Pelt Music and the Full Pelt Music Podcast.
So, thank you, Frank, for joining me today for the first episode of the Full Pelt Music Podcast. It's great to have you on as the first guest.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, great pleasure for me. You've been a very busy chap this year. In a year when most people have been forced to slow down due to the pandemic, you seem to have charged full ahead. I've got a bit of a list that I just want to quickly run through to remind people what you've been up to this year. Obviously, we're going to talk about the Independent Love Venue Love series that you put on, but you've also done a full band live stream with Emily Barker, socially distanced shows across the country. You've released live in Newcastle. You've released West Coast versus Wessex with NoFX. You've released Buddies 2 with John Snodgrass. You've branched out into producing, including 2 great albums from Beans on Toast and Pet Needs. You've also had a weekly live stream with Jared Reddick back at the start of the pandemic, amongst many other live stream podcast appearances that you've made. And most impressively, whilst you've done all of that, you've managed to move house and create a new studio.
Yeah.
So how on
it
earth
sounds quite impressive when you say it all out loud like that.
Yeah, how have you managed that?
Well, the thing is, this is going to sound ridiculous maybe, but hear me out. Like, in some ways I have actually been less busy than I usually am, but the difference is that in a usual year my busyness is geographically focused.
Yes.
So I'll go and be busy in Germany for a month, and I'll be busy in America for 2 months, and I'll be busy in England for a month. And if you live in England, you tend to notice the bit in England and not notice the other two. Do you know what I mean? And the nature of the last year has been that because everything's online, it's kind of a weird setup because it means that you're sort of conceptually, you're potentially broadcasting to everyone everywhere. I mean, of course you're not, because particularly as time wore on, people got pretty bored of everything. I mean, I did as well. So I'm not on that. But so I think for your average kind of person on the internet, it seems like I'm being manically busy, but I'm usually this busy, if not busier. But it's just focused. Do you know what I mean? I mean, obviously, a lot of things have been new. Live streaming being the obvious one. I mean, moving house is a massive thing.
It is.
Teaching myself how to produce and building this studio that I'm in right now has been big news as well. So there's definitely been new things and new types of business. But I mean, right now at a point where like there's the beginnings of suggestions of things going back to quote unquote normal. I find that like my stamina is fucked. Like the other day,
I'm with you. Yeah,
I had like 3 things to do in the same day, and it was like, how am I going to do that? Like, it's physically impossible. And of course it's not, and I used to do it all the time. But it's just like I'm sort of terrified a little bit of going back to the schedule I used to have.
I'm feeling that exactly the same. It's going to be interesting when we do get back. So let's roll it back a bit to last March, and we'll work our way through some of the many things that you've been up to. So back in March, you were actually on tour when the country began to realise the seriousness of what was coming. I was actually at the Southend show, which was your last show.
It was the last proper non-social distance show. Nice.
I was reviewing that for another publication, and it was an interesting evening. So can you just talk me through the last kind of week on that tour and how you came to realise, that you were going to have to head home?
Well, I mean, first thing is it was the most fun tour. I mean, I love my band, don't get me wrong, but it was like I haven't done a solo headline tour in the UK for ages. And I had my wife on tour with me for the first time, which turned out to be excellent. And I had Mike Schnabel, who I'm hoping you caught that night.
Yes, he was fantastic.
Yeah, he's a dear friend, and he's an unbelievable songwriter. And Vanessa, his other half, is also just a dear. I've known Vanessa for 1,000 years, and we go way back, and she's lovely. And so everyone was having a lovely time. Also, I might add just briefly, like the thing about that tour, because there were so few of us on the tour bus, there's a thing you can do. You can turn one of the lounges in the tour bus into a double bedroom. So I was touring in a double bedroom with my wife, and it was just like, I'm never going to sleep in a bunk again. But so everyone was having a lovely time. at the start, the news was kind of around about something happening in China, and everybody thought, well, it'll be the same as bird flu. No one's going to care. It's not going to affect us in what feels like a very hubristic way. You know, a week later, there was things happening in Italy, and everyone was like, huh, okay. And then there was first cases over here and that sort of thing. And then, yeah, I remember the weirdest part was the last 4 days. We had a day off on which the government had a press conference in which they basically said this is coming. It's bad. Large gatherings are a bad idea, but they're not illegal yet. Which was
don't go to the pub, but the pubs are still open.
And it was so shit for me because, like, you know, I have to think about insurance, I have to think about liability. I also just have to think about the morality of it because, on the one hand, I don't want to make things worse, but on the other hand, I have a contract as far as I'm concerned with every person who's bought a ticket. Do you know what I mean? It's like, and it's my job, and it's what I do, and it's how I make a living, and it's how my crew get paid. So the last 3 shows we did Bath, Aylesbury, and Southend, and basically all day for those 3 days, I was in conference calls with my manager and the promoter and my booking agent and my tour manager, discussing this shit, like what's the right thing to do. And on the first night in Bath, we decided to go ahead, and I asked the venues, it was a sold out show, I asked them to put a clicker on the door to see how many people showed up. We had 96% attendance, which is higher than you would normally expect for a sold out show. There's usually 5 or 10% drop off anyway. So it was like, oh, well, people want to come, and the vibe was amazing that night. Then we did Aylesbury, exactly the same thing happened, amazing vibe after a really kind of fractious day. Southend, which was on a Sunday, I seem to remember.
Yes, I think so.
The whole mood in the country had changed. You know, we had about 60% of ticket holders showed up, and like, I always want to make sure I say this without any disrespect to the people of the Southend, not least because I'm now a man of Essex myself. But like,
of course,
you know, it's not casting aspersions on the audience, but the vibe was weird. I don't know if you got that as well.
I'd actually been at Boston about a week or so before. That
was a great
that awesome venue, Clydesdale, I think it was called, wasn't it? A very unique venue. And yeah, the difference in the crowd, both in numbers and the atmosphere, as you said, in just that kind of week. Completely changed.
Yeah, completely. And like, and I'd start getting emails and tweets and stuff telling me I was a murderer for doing shows and stuff like this, which is just like, really, of all of the people you've decided to be angry at right now to fill the aching void between birth and death for you, like, it's this week it's me, right? But like, but it, you know, it was really tense. And I remember because we've been debating it all day, and I got on stage, and as I'm sure you've noticed, I changed guitar every few songs so that my guitar tech can kind of keep things in tune and keep them clean. And my guitar tech, Kat, is like one of my oldest friends, and he came for the first guitar change. So after the first 3 songs of the show, we changed guitars, and I whispered in his ear, "Tell Tree, the tour manager, tell Tree we're going home tonight."
Yeah.
Like, the minute I was on that stage, I knew that it was over. And it sucked. It was awful, but it was just like, this is not the right thing to be doing anymore.
Exactly, yeah.
Which was a shame because I love Southend, and it was a fun show, but it was the energy was just weird. Do you know what I mean? And there was a part of my head kind of going, is this the last show I ever played? Do you know what I mean? Like,
it's such a surreal situation, you know. For us, especially at the time. You know, now we've lived with it for a year. You kind of change.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean,
how you see it, but
I think, all of us have slightly. That beginning of it all was such a strange time, and one of the weirdest times I think any of us will live through. Like, you know, I remember, like, one of the things for me, like, everyone had been talking about the whole loo roll and shortage and stockpiling and all that bollocks, and like, I didn't really believe it. Do you know what I mean? I was like, oh, come on, it's just depressed. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then as we were leaving Southend, one of the venue staff like gave me a pack of toilet roll and was just like, because when you're on tour, you don't generally go to the supermarket. Do you know what I mean? Stuff's just sort of laid on, and then she gave me, like, from the toilets in the venue kind of thing. She gave me a pack of toilet roll and was like, and I remember kind of thinking, oh, come on, like, this, you're being melodramatic. And we got home, and the following morning, there's no toilet roll in North London as far as I could see. And it was quite shocking. Do you know what I mean?
Exactly. It was. It felt like you were kind of living at the start of a disaster movie. You know, you really were worried about what was going to be coming up. So yeah, obviously, a really tough decision to head home. But obviously, the right decision at hopefully the right time. And then you hastily arranged that first live stream with Michael Schnabel and Jess. How did that come about? Where did the concept for that come from?
Well, there were a couple of things going on. I mean, first of all, as the tour finished, the four of us, as in me, Jess, Micah, and Vanessa, went back to our then house in London. Partly because, I mean, Vanessa and Micah are from Ohio, and like they're DIY punk musicians. They don't have a lot of money, and like they had a flight home booked in, and they'd arranged to like stay behind in the UK for a week to like just go camping or whatever. So it was like a few weeks until their flight, and they were pretty stressed about what was going to happen. Are we going to get stuck in London? And we love them, but it was like, wow, we're going to be locked down together for indefinitely. I mean, the whole thing was weird. And then it was also just on that very first, on the last night of the tour, driving home from Southend. First and only time in my life, incidentally, that I've had a tour bus drop me home. It was pretty awesome. I kind of got out and was like to my neighbours, I was like, but on the tour home, I was sort of chatting with my crew, and obviously it was like looking at the financial side of it was kind of daunting for me, but like I also earn money from t-shirt sales and record sales and things like that. And like I made the decision that first night to pay all of my crew who'd been on the tour until the end of the tour, which is another week's work, just because they'd been banking on that money anyway. Do you know what I mean? So we did that, and then so the four of us who'd been the tour were at home. I had a laptop. I knew how to do a live stream in theory. It's very simple. I didn't use like external mics and stuff. You just play to your laptop, press go. And we just thought, fuck it, let's do a show and let's make it a fundraiser. And it was for a few things. It was for the crew, but it was also to get Vanessa and Micah tickets to get home.
Yeah.
Because they needed that. And it seemed like a fun thing to do, and we were all there. And thankfully it was an acoustic tour anyway. So it wasn't like we were going to be stripping back any further than we had already stripped back. So yeah, we threw it all together and did it, and it was kind of wildly successful. Like we had like 15,000 people watching at one point, and then we broke Facebook. Facebook shut the stream down and said, and then emails to me, they were like, yeah, suspicious activity in your account. There was just a lot of people watching it. And I was like, that was the fucking point. Do you know what I mean? Like, Jesus Christ. Nevertheless, we raised, I think it was £44,000 out of that first one,
which is amazing. Yeah.
It's unbelievable. Do you know what I mean? It's just crazy. And so that was enough to kind of give everybody in my touring family like an initial boost, which I think really helped. And indeed to get Vanessa and Micah home. So, it was a good thing to do.
Oh, very good thing. And speaking of good things, that obviously led on to independent venue love. Of course, everyone in the world has been hit very hard by this pandemic, but the music industry as a whole has been particularly hard hit. And independent music venues have obviously really struggled, had their livelihoods completely wiped off the face of the earth. So again, where did the concept for that series come from? Obviously out of that first live stream, I would assume.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there was a couple of things. I mean, the first live stream went well. One of the nice things about tour, generally speaking, is that you're in a different place every day, which means you just kind of leave. Do you know what I mean? And there's something quite liberating about that. And even just doing multiple night stands in one place always makes you feel a bit weird, because you go back and you're like, we've already been here. What the fuck? Why are we still here? And so it came down the morning. I mean, I was pretty hungover the morning after that first live stream, and it was just, everything was still where we left it, and it was just like, oh, okay. So, and then this was still before the full fat lockdown kicked in, and I'd been having a conversation with my friends at Nambucca, which is a venue I know very well. I used to live there and stuff, and about going. They had some cameras and stuff, and I was going to go around and do a live stream from there for them. They'd asked me to do it, and I was like, which was the beginning of me being aware that independent music venues were going to be struggling. And I know a lot of people who run independent venues and work at independent venues and that kind of thing. So it wasn't like shocking news to me, but it made me think about it. And then the full fat lockdown kicked in, and I called Giles at Nambucca, and I was like, dude, I can't come round. Like, it's not allowed. And I said, but I could just do it from here, that would be a thing. And he said, okay. And we set up a PayPal that time around, this is the thing I learned as the weeks went on, how to make it better. The problem with the PayPal is there's no public total going along, so people couldn't smashed targets or whatever. But nevertheless, I mean, they raised about £12,000 that first one, and I did Sleepers of the Week, my first album, in full, and which implies an ongoing plan. Do you know what I mean? And then it was like, I just kind of said, anyone need a hand? And at the beginning, before the end of the first one, I had texts from friends of mine who run the railway in Winchester and the Joiners Island Southampton and the Tunbridge Wells Forum. So, and that kind of thing. So the first few just kind of figured themselves out. And then after that, it was just a case of like, whoever asks gets one. I had some slightly weird moments where some people were just like, oh, I guess you don't want to help out our venue. And it was like, well, just ask. That's what everybody else did, and maybe don't be bitchy about it as your opening gambit. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, definitely.
But yeah, you know, and it went from there. And some of them are venues I've never been to, like the Parish in Huddersfield, or Dirty Rockers in Dudley. I've never been to. You know, so, but it was cool. And like every week I'd have a week-long conversation with the people who ran the venue, and I'd throw the posters together and then get them to get the fundraiser. And it became kind of like a routine, which I found quite useful because I'm sure you will sympathize with like the whole thing. One of the major things about lockdown was the collapse of routine. And you know,
that was my next question. Obviously, as someone that watched it week in, week out, you know, during this, again, disaster movie of a life that we began to live, that provided an escape from the terrifying realities of life, but also, as you just said, a routine. You know, so obviously, as a fan, that was very, very helpful to me for my mental health, and I'm sure everyone would agree. But obviously, it had benefits for yourself from that point of view.
Yeah, totally, and in exactly the same way, because it was like, you know, there are many misconceptions about the life of a touring musician, and one of them is that it's this sort of chaotic, anarchic kind of endless stag do or whatever. And like I actually live a very, very structured and regimented life when I'm on tour. I know what I'm doing every minute of every day. I get given a day sheet every morning that tells me, you know, at 2:05 you'll do this interview, at 2:15 we're going to get in the car and we're going to drive to the radio station. Do you know what I mean? It's like it's minute by minute.
Oh yes.
And it's always nice to get off tour and get away from that for a bit, obviously. And the first kind of week of lockdown was a bit like getting back off a really long tour. I mean, we were getting back off a tour, but like, you know, that kind of decompression. But after, you can't live like that forever. You can't just kind of day drink and watch Netflix forever. Do you know what I mean? It's a bit of a shout. So building structure was quite important for me. And like which brings us on to why I'm sitting in this room, because, you know, I took a decision to try and learn something during lockdown. And I already owned quite a lot of the technology, as in like Logic, basically, but just only ever kind of skimmed the surface of what you can do with it. So I just thought, well, I can just watch YouTube tutorials, do you know what I mean? And so I made sure I got up at a certain time, and I made sure that I did, you know, just certain things every day or every week. And one of them was doing the shows, and it was useful, definitely.
So you've enjoyed the kind of transition into producing work as well. Obviously, I mentioned two albums that I've really enjoyed, Beans on Toasts and Pet Needs, who were new to me, but that's a stunning album. So obviously, we can expect more production work from yourself in the future.
I'm working on like 4 or 5 different projects, none of them being my own at the moment. Which is what I wanted to do, and it's exciting, and it's kind of a different type of creativity. You know, I'm not writing the songs, but I'm sort of helping out with arrangement and performance and that kind of thing when I'm actually recording people. Even just mixing, though, you know, there's a fair degree of creative input, and it's been an interesting process, because on one level I was like, I'm starting right at the beginning of this, and tried to keep that mindset, but of course I'm not really, because I have been on the receiving end of being produced and mixed many times, and I've sat around in studios, and one of my annoyances is that I've kind of worked with people like Butch Walker and Rich Costey in the past and not really paid much attention to where they were putting the microphones and what kind of compression they were using, and now I'm like, god damn it,
hindsight is wonderful. Yes.
Yeah, right, exactly. But yeah, you know, it's like I say, like I'm talking to Pet Needs about making their next record. I had a band, I'm not going to mention who they are just yet. I had a band in the other day, and it was just cool stuff. I sort of was making some kind of like arrangement suggestions and stuff that to me is just totally second nature. And they were like, wow, that's a great idea. And it was like, oh my God, everyone does this. Do you know what I mean? But like little trick, just because I've been making records for like, you know, nearly 3 decades. In fact, 3 decades. Do I mean 3 decades? No, I mean 2 decades. Christ, how old am I?
Yes.
2 decades. Yeah.
Yeah, lockdown's done that to all of us.
So, you know, Yeah, and it's kind of, it's exciting, it's cool, and you just kind of throw a suggestion in, and if it brings the song together, it's a really cool moment, you know. So yeah, I'm really enjoying it.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like you're getting a lot out of it. And will it be, obviously you've got a new album yourself that you've been
Yeah.
working on. You've debuted a few songs during the live
Mhm.
streams. Has your production work for other people changed at all? How you viewed making the new album?
That's a good question. I think it's possibly made me slightly more annoying to the producer that we're working with, just in that suddenly I've now got opinions about limiting on mixers and you know, EQ balance and stuff. And it's a guy called Rich Costi who I've worked with before on Tape Deck Heart, and he is a little bit like, Jesus Christ, dude, like fuck off. Not least because he's one of the best producers in the whole world, and I'm just kind of like, no, I feel like the limiter's pumping a little bit on this track, and he's just like, shut up. But I mean, I not directly. I mean, it's made my own demoing has got a lot better, obviously. And whether or not I record and produce my own material is an open question to me. I'm not doing that right now, and I do often feel like there is one of the many things a producer does is stand outside the fray. Do you know what I mean?
Definitely.
And is kind of like the referee almost. And that can be very useful in making a record and making a record as good as it can be. But having said that, I mean, we'll see. I don't know. I might toy with it as time goes by. Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah. So just to close off the independent venue love conversation, obviously we talked about the amount of money you made on the first couple of live streams. Obviously, 21 live streams later, you raised an exceptional amount of money for a number of venues, obviously desperately in need, and obviously you should be really proud of that. You know, I mean, the question really is, at the start when you began with the live streams, could you possibly have imagined how much money you would eventually come to raise?
No, and I mean, I am proud of it. I mean, obviously other people donated the money. Like, I mean, I threw money into the pot each week as much as I could afford.
Yeah.
It's fucking £250,000. Jesus Christ. But you know, I am proud of it. I mean, I think, you know, we forget that at the beginning. Here's the thing. So Lost Evenings was supposed to be in May last year, and the lockdown started late March. In Berlin, yeah. We seriously, when the first lockdown kicked in, I had a conversation with my manager where we said, well, it's good that it started this early because it means it'll definitely be over by mid-May, because that's the terms that the government was talking in at the time. 2, 3, 4 weeks or whatever. And we were like, well, cool, it'll be over and done with, and we can still proceed with Lost Evenings. Obviously, reasonably quickly, it became apparent that that wasn't going to happen. But, you know, so at the beginning, I thought maybe I'll do like 3 of these. The other thing is that, and I'm going to be slightly careful in what I say on this, but like, my initial plan was to hand it off as soon as possible. I was like, I'll do a couple of these. It's so easy and so simple and so obvious that loads of other musicians will pick it up and it'll become a thing. And I'll be the guy who did the first few, and that'll be enough for me. And I kind of text bombarded all of my musician friends, and in fairness, like, an awful lot of them were busy doing charitable things, and as you know at the beginning, like, loads of people are suffering this, and this is by no means the only thing that's a problem. So for example, I spoke to Billy Bragg, and he was like, well, I've done something for the Sugar Mill already, but I'm now doing a thing for refugees. And I was just like, of course you are, Bill. And like, and you know, no worries, do you know what I mean? Like, and all that kind of thing. But like, I definitely had I was a little disappointed by some
the uptake, kind of.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's been a fair degree of kind of pull up the ladder from the music industry generally in the last year. Like, particularly, I mean, not even necessarily the venues thing. I've been doing a lot of work with the We Make Events campaign, which is talking about raising funds and awareness about touring crew, and the number of musicians and record labels who just don't give a fuck. And it puzzles me, because I live in a touring dormitory with my crew. Do you know what I mean? I sleep with my face 8 inches away from the guitar arse. You know, and I do that 10 months of the year sometimes. And therefore, he's one of my best friends. And like, people are just like, oh yeah. And I'm like, what the fuck? You know, like, this last year has been pretty rough for me financially, but I'm not starving to death. I'm not getting evicted. Do you know what I mean? And like, it just seemed just to take 5 minutes to make a selfie video. Do you know what I mean? Christ.
Yeah.
But like, a lot of people There have been people who will sort of remain nameless, who I've interacted with, whose management or label or whatever have been like, yeah, it's not really the look we're going for right now. And I'm like,
Wow.
Oh, really? Helping people isn't the look you're going for
during a global pandemic.
I don't want to, and I also don't want this to sound like I'm a brilliant person, because Jesus Christ. But like, do you know what I mean? Like, I just sort of feel like there's been quite a lot of people have just kind of decided to kind of lock the front door to their large house and wait until they can go out and make money again. And that just seems kind of lame to me. You know, I would have hoped, and at the beginning of lockdown and everything, there was kind of a bit of a Blitz spirit vibe. We're all in this together, and
there certainly was,
yeah, and that just didn't seem to last for a lot of people in my industry, and that saddens me quite a lot.
Yes, because
if I've raised this amount of money, just imagine what somebody who's more famous.
Precisely, you know, you're in a privileged position with a platform to make a difference. Right. And during a global pandemic, you know, you would like to think you'd see the best of people. So yeah,
and it's what bears repeating that, like, you know, some people were busy raising money for
exactly.
Other people. So like Dan from Bastille, for example, who's a very dear friend of mine, like he has his own charitable foundation, for God's sake, and was very, very busy with that. And I take my hat off to that guy every morning. Do you know what I mean? Like he's a dude, love him to pieces. But there were other people, and it was just like, wow, man.
Yeah, of course. I mean, again, everyone has their own way of coping with difficult situations like this. But especially the more corporate entities, you would have hoped.
Well, yes. I mean, there are certain. I mean, this is a whole other topic which we don't really have time to get into. But the last year's been really interesting in terms of the kind of financial structuring of the music industry, just because certain people have been not only fine but making more money in the last year.
Exactly.
And generally speaking, it hasn't been the artists, and it's kind of like, hold the fucking phone, like what? And there has been some conversations about that have started in a way that I think is kind of promising, actually.
Oh, exactly. I've enjoyed the Broken Record campaign from Top Records.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And there were kind of like DCMS committees and that kind of thing. So you know, I think it's the beginning of a long process. And I'm not sure it needs to be quite as kind of like combative as some people want it to be. You know, ultimately, my record label do a lot for me, and you know,
yes,
I mean, Extra Mile,
Extra Mile are fantastic,
yeah, and so, you know, I'm not trying to I don't want to like fight everybody on this, but at the same time, there's kind of potentially ways of making things more equitable.
There certainly is, and obviously, we all hope that live music and the music industry is going to return to normal at some point. You know, I mean, there's obviously hope for this summer for festivals and everything. But I think it's important to recognise that actually the industry wasn't perfect as it was, and there's certainly elements that could be changed.
And could be improved upon. I mean, to be honest with you, I'm slightly reserving judgment about this summer. I mean, you know, I sort of have to take bookings as they come in, but like the last year has taught me caution, if nothing else. About
I mean, you managed to fit in some great socially distant shows last summer, which again I got to Nottingham, and it was definitely a highlight during some very dark times. I mean, that was stunning. The Arboretum, when it got dark as well. That was a beautiful venue to have a show. Obviously, a very emotional show. It hadn't been the first sort of live music in about 6 months for a lot of people. So obviously, you know, it'd be great if we could get festivals back as they were this summer.
Oh yeah,
I'm with you that
my skepticism isn't about wanting it. Do you know what I mean? Jesus Christ,
of course.
Like, please. So
yeah, a bit of government support wouldn't go too far, for sure. So as far as obviously the live streams again have been very successful for you, but looking into the future slightly, when hopefully we do get a normal or a new normal, do you still see a future for music live streams? When normal shows can return?
I'm kind of in two minds about it. I mean, instinctively, I hope not would be the best way of putting it. I mean, for a lot of different reasons. Partly because I'm so fucking sick of playing to my phone or my laptop, and you know, also like, I mean, financially, it's not great for the industry. Like in normal times, and this goes back to what I was saying right at the beginning. Like in normal times, you know, the way that things work for me financially is that it's kind of concentrated. Like everybody who wants to see me in Hanover comes when I play in Hanover, and everybody who wants to see me in London comes when I play in London, and whatever. And there's something about the idea of constantly live streaming every show is kind of like about that. Having said that, I'm aware that there are some people who have long-term health issues that means that they may not be able to return to shows anytime soon. Secondly, most importantly, almost, like, I may not be able to tour outside the UK anytime immediately soon, and so, you know, it's these are secondary thoughts for me, but important ones, you know.
Certainly.
And at base, I like playing live music in a room to a real audience of humans, and I want to do as much of that as I can. But I guess we'll see. You know, time will tell.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously, you're a busy man, so I'm going to let you go in a moment. Just one off-piste question from the line of questioning we've been having. Just want to take you back to 2014 and your appearance on Celebrity Mastermind, which you won. And your specialist topic was Iron Maiden. So what were your memories now of appearing on the show?
It was amazing. When I was a kid, I mean, I was a nerd. I was a scholarship kid when I was younger, and me and my contemporaries, as it were, would often talk about Mastermind, and it was a bit of a standard question: what's your specialist subject? And I always said Iron Maiden, because I've loved them since I was 10 years old. And the offer came through, and I don't think my manager knew quite how much I was going to shit the bed when it came. I was like, fucking yes. And I went and did it, and it was cool. I had to kind of fly in from America for it, which was ridiculous in many ways. But it was cool, and like, no one else who was on it with me. It was Roy Hudd, John Cooper Clarke, and another guy who was like a children's TV presenter. None of them like remotely gave a fuck about winning or not winning, and I was like, I have to win. But I got to hang out with John Cooper Clarke, which was pretty cool because he's a legend.
He is brilliant.
Yeah, and Roy Hudd was pretty cool too, actually. But yeah, so, you know, I'm very glad I did it, and I have a trophy with my name on it, and that's cool.
And then a few months after that, you got to play ahead of Iron Maiden at Sonosphere Festival.
Yeah.
So that must have been a bit of a dream come true, given you.
Yeah, and I think the two things were not unrelated, should we say. And I also interviewed Maiden for The Guardian in Copenhagen around then as well. So my kind of youthful Maiden like fandom was like, oh, for a little bit. So it was pretty cool.
So yeah, just to close us off, thank you very much, Frank, for appearing on the show. All the best for the future, and hopefully we'll see you in the field somewhere.
Well, hopefully we can have this chat in person in a more extended format.
That would be great. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks everyone for listening. Hope you really enjoyed the show. Thanks, Frank, for joining me. Be sure to follow him on his social media channels at Frank Turner on Twitter and Instagram, and at Frank Turner Music on Facebook. Also, be sure, if you're watching on YouTube, to give us a subscribe so that you can keep up to date with the Full Pelt Music Podcast as we release more episodes going forward. And again, please be sure to follow us on our social media channels at Full Pelt Music. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.